My mother tried to pull a fast one and take over the house I bought with my own hard-earned money. She really thought a judge would just hand it over to her, but she had no clue what I had quietly prepared behind the scenes. Way back during the housing market crash, I got lucky and managed to snag a small starter home. I didn't get any handouts or co-signers, just me hustling, scraping every penny, and eventually pulling it off solo. It wasn't anything extravagant. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a modest little yard, but it was mine. Every inch of it. I lived there for close to 10 years, grinding and saving, always thinking ahead about eventually moving up to something better. Then life moved forward. I met the man who's now my husband, and the two of us decided it was time to upgrade. We combined our savings, bought a more spacious home, and I held on to the old house as a backup investment. I figured maybe we'd rent it out someday, or just hang on to it in case we needed it down the road. Nothing urgent, just a good option to have. And that's when my parents started circling. To say they were struggling financially would be putting it mildly. A few years back, they lost their home to foreclosure, a shadow that had been hanging over them for a long time. Honestly, I lost count of how many times we moved when I was a kid, always getting kicked out or falling behind on rent because they were in over their heads. After the foreclosure, they ended up in this cramped rental and were pretty clearly hinting they were tired of bouncing from place to place. That's when their attention shifted to my little house. They started talking about how it was perfect, cozy, manageable, nothing too physically demanding. They're both retired now, which adds to their challenges. My dad's health has been declining, and after 36 grueling years on the job, he finally put down his tools and retired. My mom? She never worked a day in her life, so they're barely getting by on his retirement benefits, just scraping through each month. At first, they asked to live there rent-free. Yep, you heard that right. I shut that idea down immediately. I mean, seriously, I worked my tail off to own that place, and I'm not running a free housing program. Even for family, I try to be reasonable though, so I offered them a heavily discounted rent, way below market, just enough to cover the essentials. Then, out of nowhere, they came into an inheritance, and it wasn't pocket change. It was well into 6 figures. My mom called me absolutely thrilled, saying they finally caught a break and were going to pay off my house. I reminded her, gently, that the house was already paid off, but sure, I played along and let her feel good about it. We came to an agreement. They'd use part of the inheritance to prepay their rent, covering several years in advance. I made it crystal clear that this was prepaid rent, not a down payment, not a purchase, just rent. They weren't buying anything, so we had a proper lease drafted. Everything was put in writing, every term, every detail, just so there'd be no confusion later. This wasn't some casual handshake deal. It was a formal lease, signed, notarized, completely legit. I even kept it simple. They'd cover property taxes and insurance, which came out to about $350 a month. That way they didn't have to stress over big payments, just the basics. But right after we signed, it was like something snapped in my mom's mind. She started acting like the place was hers now. She'd talk about her plans to decorate, plant flowers, paint, and make small upgrades. At first, I figured it was harmless stuff, so I didn't push back. What I didn't realize was that she'd twisted things around in her head and actually believed they now owned the place. That, in hindsight, was my first big mistake. Fast forward a few years, and I'm not making a dime from this arrangement. They're living their dirt cheap, and honestly, I could easily get way more if I listed it for regular rent. But they're my parents, so I let it be. Then one day, I had to let them know about a small bump in the rent, just $3. $3 whole. The insurance premium had gone up slightly. So I figured I'd adjust the rent to match. Nothing major. I gave her a quick call, said, "Hey, just a heads up, insurance increased a bit, so rent will go up by $3. Not a big deal, right? Apparently, to her, it was the end of the world. She lost her mind. She screamed at me like I jacked the rent up by hundreds, accused me of being greedy, claimed I was taking advantage, and made me out to be some heartless slumlord. She started saying things like, "We paid off the mortgage. We deserve to live here without any increases." Out of nowhere, she was hurling wild accusations. I calmly reminded her, again, that the mortgage was already paid off when they moved in. What they paid was rent in advance. But she was so deep in her fantasy that she truly believed she had some legal claim to the house. Then she hit me with a big one. She said she was going to take me to court. She swore a judge would rule in her favor because of everything they'd done for the house. And by everything, she meant planting flowers, repainting the mailbox, and putting in a new garden, cosmetic stuff she wanted to do, not improvements that added any actual value. I was stunned. We had a solid, notarized lease. I was the only person on the deed. There was no gray area, no loophole, no ambiguity. Everything was locked down tight. But she genuinely believed she had a case. She called me every name under the sun. Told me I was selfish, ungrateful, said I was exploiting her and my dad. And speaking of my dad, he just stood there silently, didn't say a word to back me up, which honestly was pretty typical for him. That phone call was a turning point. It was the moment I realized just how far gone she was. In her mind, this wasn't my house anymore. It was her house, her prize, her reward for putting in flowers and repainting a few walls. This whole situation wasn't about a measly $3, it was about power, about control. She believed she had earned that house, that I was just a kid with his name on some papers. Looking back now, I probably should have seen the warning signs earlier. There were definitely red flags, but deep down, I just didn't want to believe my own mother would try to steal something from me. I mean, seriously, who does that? After that last argument with my mom over the $3 rent bump, things just kept spiraling. I figured she'd cool off in a couple of days, maybe realize how absurd the whole thing was. I mean, we're talking $3. But nope, she only got more fired up. I started getting nonstop calls and texts, every message packed with guilt trips and drama. Each one was more unhinged than the last. It was the usual stuff, like, after all we've done for you, or we're the reason you even have that house. Then she dropped her go-to line. You're trying to throw your own parents out onto the street. That one's her signature move when she knows she's losing, plays the helpless victim like she's starring in some sad little movie. She always goes full martyr, like I'm some kind of cold-hearted landlord and she's out here begging for crumbs. I ignored most of it. Figured she just needed to vent, but then my dad jumped into the drama. He's normally the quiet one, always nodding along with whatever she says, but now he was calling me too, saying stuff like, your mom's just upset, and maybe you should listen to her side. He even said she felt like I was taking advantage of them. At that point, I'd had enough, so I just told him flat out, look, if she really thinks there's some major issue here, she can take it up with a lawyer. I figured that would shut it down, right? I thought just mentioning legal stuff would make them realize how ridiculous they were being. But of course, my mom took that as a personal dare. Next thing I know, she's saying she's exploring legal options. I almost laughed. Legal options? Over $3? But then it got even worse. She demanded a full breakdown of the bills. She wanted to see every single expense I was allegedly forcing on them. Apparently, she thought I was making up numbers just to squeeze more money out of them. And guess what? My dad, Mr. Reasonable, sided with her. He said something like, we just want transparency, like I'm running some kind of shady operation out of this little house. So fine, I sent them everything, property taxes, insurance, the whole deal, all legit, nothing weird, just what it cost to keep the place running. But of course, that still wasn't good enough. My mom suddenly thought she was some expert investigator. She started combing through every line like she was auditing a Fortune 500 company. I was getting messages at all hours. Questions about why the insurance premium changed, if I'd shopped for cheaper policies, how the tax rate was calculated, all this chaos over $3 freaking. It was like she forgot I was her kid and started treating me like a slumlord. After a few days of this nonsense, I finally lost it. I told her straight, look, I'm not making a dime off you. You're paying way less than I could get from someone else. And I've been more than fair. And then I laid it out plain. If you don't like the arrangement, you're free to move out. Yeah, it sounded harsh, but I was way past being polite. They were acting entitled, like I owed them something, when in reality, I was going out of my way to help. But that's when things really flipped. Suddenly, my mom went from playing the victim to throwing out threats. She said, if you want to treat us like renters, fine, but don't expect us to just sit back and do nothing. She started ranting about all the things they'd done for the house. The garden she planted, a new mailbox, some little fix-ups here and there in her mind that gave her leverage, like those minor upgrades somehow earned her a piece of the property. That's when I snapped. I reminded her, calmly for once, that they signed a lease. That lease makes them tenants, not owners. I'm the only one listed on the deed. Legally, they have zero claim. But she wasn't hearing any of it. She said stuff like, we've lived here for years. This is our home. You can't just kick us out. Then she flat out said she was ready to go to court and fight for her rights. I just sat there stunned. My own mother, ready to drag me into court over a house I own, over a $3 increase. So I told her, look, if you really think you've got a case, go ahead and file. I'll be right here waiting. I was just exhausted. I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. I mean, what kind of parent does that? But then my dad stepped in again, trying to be the peacemaker. He was all, maybe we can all sit down and find a compromise. Normally, I'd be open to that. I wanted to work things out, but at that point, I was too burned out. They weren't treating me like family. They were treating me like some greedy stranger. All because I asked for a small, reasonable change. So I told him there is no compromise. Either you pay the extra $3 or you leave. It's really that simple. After that call, I thought maybe it was done. Maybe they'd cool off and realize how ridiculous they were being. But no, the next day, I got this long, dramatic message from my mom. It was basically her final defense, a laundry list of every single thing they'd ever done for the house. She mentioned fixing the shed roof, which was barely a patch job. She went on about how they planted flowers, replaced a leaky hose, and did other tiny chores. She genuinely acted like all this gave her some kind of claim to the property. I just sat there reading it, shaking my head. It was like she thought sweeping the porch once in a while counted as a down payment. And then I got to the end of the message, and there it was, the threat. If you don't acknowledge everything we've done, we'll be forced to take legal action. No more hints, no more guilt trips, just a straight-up threat. I couldn't believe it. All of this over $3. I know some people might say, just let it go, but it's not even about the money anymore. It's about the fact that they're acting like the house belongs to them, like I'm stealing something from them. But I've got the lease, the deed, everything in black and white. They're renters, nothing more. My mom just refuses to accept that, and my dad, well, he's too afraid to push back on her. So that's it, I've stopped playing nice. I sent her one last message. You either pay the rent as agreed or you move out. No apologies, no compromises. They were the ones who made this mess complicated, and I was done bending over backwards to keep the peace. After that, the silence was deafening. No texts, no calls, nothing. For a second, I almost believed they were backing off, like maybe they finally got it that I wasn't going to cave, but I knew my mom too well. She wasn't done, she was just regrouping, plotting her next move. That gut feeling? It wouldn't let up. This wasn't over, not even close. Days went by with radio silence, and I don't mean just quiet, I mean dead silent, no guilt trips, no passive-aggressive messages. At first, I let myself hope maybe they finally realized how ridiculous this whole situation was. But deep down, I knew better. My mom doesn't retreat, she reloads. And sure enough, a few days later, I get a call from my dad. Normally, he's the level-headed one, the peacekeeper, but this time, he sounded rattled. Didn't take long for him to get to the point. He wanted to sit down, said we needed to have a face-to-face, grown-up conversation. But the way he said it, it didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like an order. Honestly, I was already over the whole thing, but he sounded desperate, and against my better judgment, I agreed. I thought maybe, just maybe, if we talked in person, I could finally get through to them, so we picked a time and met at a diner. I walk in and spot them right away. My mom's sitting there with her arms crossed like she's ready for battle. My dad's pretending to read the menu, like that's gonna shield him from whatever's coming. I give a quick, hey, sit down, and before I even get settled, she starts. She goes, side-eye, I can't believe you're making such a big deal out of this. This is how you treat the people who raised you? I let her go off. I wasn't interrupting. She was laying it on thick. How they'd done everything for me. How this house was supposed to be their sanctuary now that they're getting older. She had this theatrical tone, like she was delivering some kind of Oscar-worthy monologue. When she finally stopped for a breath, I looked her straight in the eye and said, Mom, this isn't your house. You signed a lease. You're renting. I'm not doing this to squeeze you. I'm doing it because it's the only fair way to handle things. She turned red, and just as the tension hit its peak, my dad finally chimed in. He said, Can't you see how she feels? It's just a small amount. She feels like a stranger in her own home. I got it. He was trying to smooth things over, but all it did was enable her more. So I turned to him and said, Dad, you both agreed to this. This isn't about feelings. It's a legal agreement. But of course, my mom wasn't having it. She switched tactics, started digging up all this ancient history from my childhood, stuff I didn't even remember. She said things like, Do you remember everything we gave up for you? All we did for you growing up? Like that meant I owed them my house, and yeah, it hit a nerve. I do appreciate what they did, but that's not what this is. I told her as calmly as I could. I'm not forgetting anything, but that doesn't mean you get to treat me like I owe you a house. You're paying next to nothing in rent. I could be renting this place out for 4 times as much. This isn't about the money. It's about the principle. That's when she lost it. She called me greedy, said I was selfish and only cared about money, like she had this script in her head, and no matter what I said, she wasn't changing a single line. She even said, You're lucky we're not asking for more, after all the work we've done around here. I almost laughed. Work? You mean the garden she wanted? The random little fixes she insisted on? That wasn't investment, that was personal taste. So I told her, Mom, none of that changes the facts. I paid for this house. I'm on the deed. This place is mine. Then my dad spoke again. And this time, there was this sharpness in his voice I hadn't heard before. He said, well, maybe if you care so much about the legal side, we should start calculating what we've put into this place. I stared at him, stunned. My dad, the reasonable one, was now talking about getting reimbursed for cosmetic stuff they wanted in the first place. That's when it really sank in. They weren't just pushing boundaries anymore. They'd stepped fully into delusion. They actually believed they had a claim here, like time spent living in the house meant ownership. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and tried to keep it together, looked at both of them and said, you're on the lease, you're tenants. That's all this is. My dad mumbled something about fairness. My mom went right back to accusing me of trying to take advantage of them. At that point, it felt like arguing with a brick wall. Eventually, I just said it. If you're that unhappy, then leave. No one's forcing you to stay. You don't want to pay rent? Fine, but you don't get to live here acting like you own the place. That's not how this works. The room went dead quiet after that. My dad just stared down at the table, and my mom shot daggers at me with her eyes. She wasn't used to hearing no, especially not from me. I'd spent most of my life trying to keep things smooth for them, going along with whatever they wanted to avoid stirring the pot. But this had gone too far. We sat there in complete silence for what felt like forever, the kind of tension that makes your skin itch. I could tell they hadn't expected me to stand firm. In their minds, I was supposed to cave like always, given so they could feel in control again, but I wasn't doing that anymore. This was my property. They didn't get to bully me just because they were my parents. Finally, my dad glanced up and said, well, think about it. No apology, no acknowledgement of how far they'd pushed this, just that vague sentence like it somehow wrapped things up. I nodded and said, all right. Then I got up, tossed a couple bucks on the table for my coffee, and walked out without saying another word. As I left, I felt this strange mix swirling in me, relief for finally holding my ground, and frustration that it had even come to this. But at least this time, I hadn't let the guilt get to me. I didn't let them twist things and make me feel like I owed them more than I already had. Even so, deep down I knew this wasn't the end. My mom never let go of anything without a fight, and the look she gave me told me all I needed to know. She was already planning her next move, but for now, at least they knew exactly where I stood. After all that tension at the diner, I thought maybe things would cool down. I mean, I'd made everything crystal clear. They were tenants, not owners, and that was the end of it. Part of me hoped they'd actually process that and back off. Wishful thinking. The silence held for about a week. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my mom. I braced myself before answering, half expecting a repeat performance of her usual arguments, but this time, her tone was calm. Too calm. She said she wanted me to stop by the house so we could go over a few things. I don't know why, but something about her voice made my skin crawl. It didn't sound right. Still, I agreed. Maybe, just maybe, this was her way of making peace. When I pulled up, my dad was sitting on the front steps. He looked tense, which wasn't like him at all. Barely greeted me, just gave a stiff nod and waved me inside. That's when I saw her. My mom was in the living room, standing next to a stack of papers on the coffee table. Immediately, I felt my stomach drop. That stack screamed trouble. She started talking like she was reading from a script, saying she understood it was legally my house, but felt they'd invested so much over the years that they should have some sort of rights too. Then she pushed the papers toward me, saying, these are estimates of everything we've done to make this place livable. I looked down and, sure enough, it was a full breakdown. Itemized costs for every minor thing they'd ever done or bought for the house. Landscaping, aka the flower garden she planted for herself. Shed repairs, basically patching a few shingles. Routine cleaning, something every tenant does. She'd added it all up like it was a business investment. As I flipped through the pages, it just got more absurd. There was a charge for new mailbox installation, and even a line item for a garden hose she never replaced. It was like she was building a case that every little effort gave them some form of equity. I took a breath, trying not to lose it, and asked her directly, what are you trying to do here? She looked me in the eye and said flatly, we just want you to understand the value of what we've done in case this ends up in court. I almost laughed out loud. There I was, holding this stack of exaggerated nonsense, and she was talking like this was some kind of property dispute with legal standing. It was like she'd completely erased the fact that they were tenants with a lease in a house I owned, free and clear. I told her again, calmly but firmly, you signed a lease. That's the agreement. None of this stuff gives you any legal claim to this property. But she wasn't backing down. She doubled down, saying any judge would see how much work they'd done and wouldn't treat it like a normal rental situation. She even said she'd researched her rights and felt confident that they had a valid case. At that point, it was clear she wasn't just being difficult, she was seriously trying to rewrite reality. My dad didn't say a single word, just sat there staring at the floor, and that told me everything. Either he was fully on board with her plan, or he just didn't have the courage to tell her she'd completely lost it. So I finally laid it out, plain and simple. I told her, "Mom, none of this changes the fact that the house is legally mine." I told her a judge isn't going to care about a mailbox or a flower bed. It's still my name on the deed, but she wasn't budging an inch. She said something like, "Well, maybe a judge would see it differently. Maybe they'll think we deserve compensation for everything we've done." That's when it hit me. She didn't just want part of the house, she wanted a payout. She was trying to guilt me into handing over money by tossing around words like value and investment, like she was negotiating some business deal. This was the same woman who told me when I was 18 not to expect a penny from them, the same mom who made me start paying rent the second I got my first part-time job, and now she's standing here acting like I owe her something? For what? Being a tenant. I set the stack of papers back on the table and said, "Mom, I'm not paying you a dime for routine upkeep. You signed a lease, and that's the agreement. That's what this is." She was livid. I could see it all over her face, but there was something else there too, like she was realizing I wasn't going to fold this time, and just like that, she shifted tactics again. "Well, if that's how you feel," she snapped, "maybe we'll just stop paying rent altogether." I was stunned for a second. I looked at her and said, "You do realize if you stop paying, I can legally evict you, right?" And she just shrugged, like she didn't care. "Go ahead," she said. "Try it. We'll show the judge everything we've done. They'll understand we've earned the right to stay." At that point, I felt like I wasn't talking to my mom anymore. I was talking to someone playing a character, trying to flip the script and make me the villain. It was like a game to her now, some twisted standoff to see who blinked first. I glanced at my dad again, hoping, begging for him to step in and be the voice of reason. He just sighed, kind of helpless, and muttered, "Your mom's been under a lot of stress. Maybe just think about it." Think about what? Giving in? Pretending she had a legal claim to the house? No, absolutely not. So I told them one last time, as clearly as I could, "If you want to stay here, follow the lease, pay your rent, cover the taxes and insurance like we agreed. If you don't want to do that, then you'll need to move." My mom's face went from furious to wounded in seconds, like she couldn't believe I had the nerve to stand up to her. But I wasn't going to cave. Not anymore. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells around her. I told them both they had until the end of the month to decide. Either stick to the deal or move out. And with that, I turned and walked out. I didn't wait for a reply. Didn't give them one more second of control. Getting into my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. The weight of guilt, of obligation, of constantly bending to keep the peace it lifted. For once, I stood my ground. But I also knew this wasn't the final chapter. If anything, I just poured gasoline on whatever plan she was already cooking up. My mom doesn't take no for an answer. Not without a fight. That look she gave me? Yeah, she was already thinking about her next move. And I was ready, finally, because no matter what came next, I had the law behind me, and I wasn't going to let her bully me into submission again. After that last face-off, everything went quiet. I didn't hear a word from either of them for a couple of weeks. Honestly, it was kind of peaceful, like the eye of the storm, and yeah, deep down I knew it wouldn't last, but I needed the break, needed time to remember that saying no didn't make me a bad son. It just meant I was finally doing what was fair. But quiet never lasts long in my family. Out of the blue, my mom called. No yelling this time, no accusations, just calm, almost gentle. She said she wanted to make peace, that she'd had time to reflect and hoped we could find a compromise, and for a moment, God help me, I believed her. I guess some part of me still wanted to believe things could go back to normal, that maybe this time, she actually meant it. So, even though my gut told me not to, I agreed to meet her at the house one last time. When I got there, she was already out on the porch with my dad. The air felt tense, off, like everyone was holding their breath. She stood with this serious, calculated expression, while my dad was slumped on the steps, staring at nothing like he'd rather be anywhere else. I gave a quick nod to both of them, and before I could even say a word, my mom jumped in. "Brady," she said, "we've decided to meet you halfway." And just like that, I knew this wasn't going to go well. When my mom says she wants to meet halfway, it usually means I do all the compromising and she walks away happy. Still, I stayed quiet and let her speak. She said she understood that the house was legally mine, emphasizing legally like it was some dirty technicality, but emotionally she said it belonged to them too because of all the time and effort they'd put into it. Then she hit me with her real request. She thought I should gift them partial ownership of the house. I stood there, trying to wrap my head around the fact that she actually said that. I asked her straight, "Wait, you're serious? You want me to give you part of my house?" She nodded without hesitation, said it would be a gesture of goodwill, something to show I appreciated all the things they'd done for me growing up. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her point blank, "Mom, that's not happening. The house is mine, you're tenants. That's the reality." But she was ready for that answer. Like she'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. She shrugged and said, "Fine, then we're done paying rent. We'll just stay here for free until you figure something out." I was stunned, speechless. Really, I looked at my dad again, hoping maybe this would be the thing that snapped him into action. But nope, same blank stare, same silence. So I told her, "If you stop paying rent, you're breaking the lease, and I'll have to evict you." That's when she smirked, actually smirked, and said, "You'd really do that to your own parents? You'd put us on the street?" It was classic guilt trip material, and yeah, in the past, that might have worked on me, but not anymore. I was done being pushed around. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Yes, if you refuse to pay rent, I will evict you. I'm not doing this game with you anymore." She exploded, accused me of being selfish, of caring more about money than family, of turning my back on the people who raised me. All the usual hits, but it didn't sting like it used to. I was too drained to even feel bad. I just stood there. Then, finally, my dad spoke up. He said, "Maybe we should just pay the rent. Honey, it's only $3 more." And that's when she really snapped, turned on him like a switch, shouting about how he never supported her, how he was spineless, how he didn't understand what was at stake. It was a full-blown meltdown, and I just stood there watching, feeling this weird mix of pity for him and frustration that he'd let it get this far. He could have stopped this long ago, but he didn't, so I looked at them both and said, "You've got until the end of the month, pay the rent or move out. That's it, no more games." She glared at me like I'd betrayed her. My dad looked small, defeated, but I didn't back down. I turned and walked away, knowing I'd probably just lit another firestorm, but also knowing I couldn't keep caving in every time she stomped her foot. I got in my car expecting angry texts or calls, but instead, I got silence. A few days passed, nothing, then out of nowhere, a text from my mom. "Fine, we'll pay your precious rent, but don't expect us to do anything extra around here anymore." I rolled my eyes, so hard, I thought I'd sprain something. The extras she was talking about were basic tenant responsibilities, mowing the lawn, cleaning the porch, that kind of thing, but if acting like she was doing me a favor helped her save face, fine, let her have that. So, yeah, they finally agreed to the extra $3, and for a brief second I thought maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was winding down. But deep down, I knew her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She was holding a grudge now, and it was only a matter of time before she pulled the next stunt. Still, for the moment, I had a sliver of peace. The real kicker? After all that drama, she sent me this long, syrupy text about how family is all that really matters, and how I should be grateful for everything they'd done for me. It was like she'd completely rewritten the whole story in her head. Somehow, she was the victim, and I was the cold-hearted villain for trying to hold her to a lease she agreed to. I didn't respond, didn't take the bait. I was exhausted, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into that mess. I'd made my point, I'd set my boundaries, and this time, I actually stuck to them. So yeah, they're still in the house, and in her version of events, I'm still the bad guy, but at least now, I know where I stand. I'm done with the guilt, done with the manipulation. They can keep playing their little games, but I'm out, I've got a life to live, and for once, I'm putting my own peace first. And if they ever bring up the house again, let's just say I've got a signed, notarized lease, and I'm not afraid to use it.